Welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host Rob Sheply here. And on today's episode, we're going to be breaking down a ACC matchup with UCal taking on number 22 Pittsburgh Panthers. Now, early in the preseason of college football, I did a big dive into the Pittsburgh Panthers. Highly recommend checking it out. And I gotta say, Pittsburgh is one of the biggest surprise probably in all of college football up to this point. They're 5-0 right now. They've had a couple quality wins. You got to say. I mean, they've beaten Cincinnati, they've beaten West Virginia, and they've also beat North Carolina last week 34-24 when Eli Holstein threw for 381 yards. And going into the season, I mean, we did expect this Pittsburgh offense to be completely transformed, bringing in first-year coordinator Cade Bell, who was head coach under Western Carolina. He brings in Desmond Reed, also another transport from Western Carolina. And I got to say, this offense has been so much fun to watch because I think, like myself and probably many other Pitt Panther fans as well, I mean, there is a healthy bit of skepticism. I mean, the thing about Pitt is they're usually known for their kind of pro style offense and primarily, building a sort of balanced attack and primarily running the ball when, you think of the days of, Dave Weinstadt and, all those great coaches as well. I mean, you really kind of sit there and think to yourself, I mean, this Pitt team could really make some noise if they can get through UCal, and they play Syracuse later this year. They play Clemson, and they play Louisville and SMU as well. So this stretch that they're going to be on is definitely going to be difficult. But if they can get off to a solid start here, it's certainly possible they can be an ACC contender. But for this week, I mean, Pittsburgh right now is favored by I think 4 or 5 points, which I would say is about accurate. But I think to some capacity too, this game could be a little bit dangerous for Pitt as well. I mean, when you think about this UCal team, I mean, they had a heartbreaking loss versus Miami last week, and eighth year under Justin Wilcox, who I gotta say, I mean, is he a guy that's going to get you a national championship? No, but he's a solid recruiter. He's really built a good foundation there, and you know, I don't think he's gotten a lot of credit for what he's pulled off this year. I mean, he's been without Jaden Ott for most of the season. Fernando Mendoza has done a really great job at not turning the ball over nearly as much as 2023. UCal actually was one of the leaders in turnovers last year with approximately 23 turnovers last season. So I think one of the things that UCal has done a terrific job about is not turning the ball over as much. And equally as well, you got to give props to the secondary. I mean, as of this week, they have 11 interceptions total, which is the most in the FBS. And you got to imagine if you're UCal, you're gonna be creative and you're gonna try to find some different schemes and maybe even bringing some safety blitzes, some secondary blitzes, anything where you can really get Eli Holstein uncomfortable. And as much as I've loved Eli Holstein so far, he redshirt guy, transferred from Alabama. He has 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 1,567 yards, 65.5 completion percentage, and he's also a quality runner too with 3 rushing touchdowns. And he's the type of guy who can get out of the pocket. He can extend plays, and he's got a very strong arm. But I think the criticism of Holstein sometimes is, I think much like some younger quarterbacks that you've typically seen, is that he is definitely in a position at times where he can force throws and try to create something out of nothing almost too many times. Because I would definitely make the argument, if you've watched, some of their games, particularly against West Virginia and North Carolina, there were definitely some times where there were multiple plays where he shouldn't have thrown the ball, and he more or less, got away with some because the linebacker or the corner would drop the ball. And I think if you're Holstein and if you're Cade Bell, I think one of the things that you have to tell Holstein this week is you can't force the balls into areas like you've done the past couple weeks. I think he deserves a hell of a lot of credit for what he's done because he's ballsy. He's not afraid to to take risks and take chances, but I think you have to find that little bit of a balance too, because UCal is the type of defense where if if that front seven can win the trenches battle and they can create some havoc versus Holstein, I think this could be a really dangerous matchup for Pittsburgh as they try to start 6-0, get their bowl eligibility, and get the best start that they've had since 1979 under Dan Marino. So regardless, it's definitely been an exciting time for Pittsburgh too. Because I mean, you remember last year when they went 3-9 and they, for the most part, struggled tremendously under their offense with Christian Value X, and then you remember a couple other quarterbacks too that USC transferred to who ended up not being very good, and also the defense struggled as well. And I think Pat Nardizzi's done a great job at saying, you know what, I've built a quality program here. You build it through primarily high school recruiting. He understands how to sell the program that he's at, and he's done a terrific job thus far. And for the amount of I feel like Narduzzi's one of those guys where you either love him or you hate him. I know for me, I've always been a Narduzzi guy. I think he's a type of guy that you want your program to be around. He's a guy that you want to play for. He's a player's coach, but he's also teach them to be disciplined, and he I think also is just very good at maximizing the players that he has. So with that said, I mean you definitely look at this team full circle, and you have Desmond Reed as well. You have Conta Mumfield, who has 3 touchdowns on the season, 426 yards. And if you're Pittsburgh, I think a couple of things that you have to do. I think first and foremost, I briefly mentioned a couple seconds ago. I think you want to find you just have to make sure that Holstein is just a little bit smarter in terms of some of the progressions that he's making, because unlike some of the other secondaries that they've gone up against, this UCal secondary is going to make you pay if you're trying to squeeze past into areas that are heavily trafficked. And you know it's going to be one of those things where I think Cade Bells is going to have to be a lot more sensitive to that. And secondarily, too, I mean, I think the one thing that Pittsburgh's offense deserves a lot more credit for that people aren't necessarily talking about is they've done a phenomenal job really getting the running backs involved. Working on those halfback swings, some screen plays, really trying to stretch out the field as much as you can, and really working on, getting that tempo going too, tiring out defenses, and assuring too that you're coming away with as many points as possible. I mean, they're 46% on third down, so they've really done a phenomenal job at getting themselves in manageable situations, extending drives, and ultimately getting points in the red zone. Yeah, as at the moment, Desmond Reed has 4 receiving touchdowns, and I think if you're Pittsburgh, I think part of the strategy has to be to continue getting him involved. I think you definitely want to extend the field as much as you can. I'm not saying that you necessarily have to play conservative. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think if you're Pitt, I think you just have to respect that defense a lot more. And I think this game is going to be a lot closer than people think. You know, if UCal can get any sort of pressure on Holstein, I can see this. I could see this game going negatively. I mean, at the same time, too, you have to think to yourself from a UCal perspective. I briefly mentioned it before. Fernando Mendoza has done a terrific job at not turning the ball over. 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's really had a strong season. He definitely deserves credit for that, despite them blowing a 25-point lead against Miami too. So I think they're going to come out motivated. I think they're going to come out hungry. According to Justin Wilcox in his press conference this week, he did say that he expects Jaden Ott to be out there. He's listed as probable at the moment, who was one of their star players. And if you're UCal, I definitely you have to get him involved early. I expect UCal to be aggressive, particularly on a Pittsburgh defense who, for the most part, has struggled at times this year. Particularly when you think about early matchups against the West Virginias and the Cincinnatis, those games really came down to the wire, and for the most part, it really came down to Eli Holstein kind of leading the charge and and getting a win here. So, when you think about UCal too, I mean, I talked about it before. They have a really strong secondary, most interceptions in the league. If you're a linebacking core, I definitely think you're going to have to, play some more man to man, really making sure you're getting really making sure you're taking care of Desmond Reed, and most importantly, I think a lot of the time, I think it is relevant that UCal has traveled as much as they have. They're traveling approximately 2,600 miles to this game, which is something that are going to be just going to have to get used to keep on doing. I mean, yes, it is definitely an advantage for Pitt to have home field, and it is an advantage for UCal to have to travel all the way to Pittsburgh. But I think, yes, you do have the home field advantage, but for me, this game is going to come down to who can control the tempo of the game most on the offensive side of the ball. Because if you're UCal, you're really going to want to get J Knock going. You're going to have to ask Fernando Mendoza to do a little bit more than usual, especially with a Pitt defense who has struggled, particularly with pass defense throughout these past couple weeks. And this could be a defining game for Pitt in some ways because you're going through you're about to go through what's going to be your toughest ACC schedule that you've had in a while. I mean, SMU has looked a lot better than people expected. You still have a dangerous Louisville team, even though they've lost. They're not ranked anymore. And you also have a Clemson team who has totally exceeded expectations. And if Pittsburgh can really put this all together and start off with a strong 6-0, I mean, you're probably looking at somewhere between a 15 to 18 ranking in terms of the AP top 25 polls. So they deserve a hell of a lot of credit for that. But at the same time, I would not be surprised if UCal plays spoiler here. They're one of those programs that have always been under the radar, and I was really excited when College Game Day was there this past weekend. Seeing Marshawn Lynch there, the crowd was electric, and for the most part, a lot of people remember the early to mid 2000s run that they had, where they were under the likes of Jeff Tidford, who he's phenomenal coach too, and they were ranked as high as the top five too. So I think you're looking at a UCal team who is hungry to play spoiler, especially after the loss that they had versus Miami, and also Florida. Also, they lost to Florida State as well. I think they're definitely gonna have a lot of motivation coming into this. I expect Jaden Knott to be involved heavily. And this is really going to come, and like I said before, it's going to come down to who can control the tempo of the game, and most importantly, who's going to make less mistakes between Eli Holstein and Mendoza too. Because if Mendoza can take advantage of a Pittsburgh defense who has not been as strong as we've seen in the past couple seasons, I would not be surprised if this game turns out to be a game where you're looking at who gets the ball in the last drive sort of situation, because I think the Pitt crowd is going to try to take UCal out of it, and at the same time too, Eli Holstein's going to be hoping to take over this game again. Look for him to really use his legs to stretch the field. He's been averaging over 350 a game passing so far.